So you want to ride a motorcycle, do you? Well, good. You've come to the right spot. Welcome to MotoMirth. We're going to talk about how to get into motorcycling, my experience getting into it more in the middle of my life, and some different tips and advice that I have. We'll talk about the 5 stages of starting motorcycling, and really just my path that I went on and some advice for you guys to get into it as well. So here they are, the 5 stages to start motorcycling. If you even want to ride, you're already at stage 1. Congratulations. The next thing really is to make some serious consideration and investigation. Is motorcycling really for you? There's a lot of things to think about with that, and we'll get into that. One of the really fun parts is just researching your bike and the gear that you might want to have, more so the bike, admittedly. That's a lot of fun and is a great stage number 3 there. 4 would be getting your training and license. Don't skip that step, guys. And then step 5, that sweet, sweet day when you buy your first bike. So that first stage, that wistful thinking. Yeah, you read that right. It's wistful, that longing, that regretful thought of, I really wish I could ride a bike. Too many people are stuck in this stage. They really just wish they could, whether it's having seen Tom Cruise in Top Gun on his motorcycle, the Tron light cycles, a variety of other Hollywood depictions that you can find of the really neat stuff happening on motorcycles and how cool and sexy they are. That's where a lot of people just have that longing of, I wish I could ride a bike. But our family and society really is also always telling us figuratively, you'll shoot your eye out, kid, right? Because it's dangerous. There are some added risks with riding a motorcycle, and so I won't ever begrudge anybody who decides to stay in this stage and decides that it's just not for them. But this is really the first bit. It's just thinking and that longing that a lot of us have to ride a bike. Some personal motivating factors for me, of course, is just sort of the, like I said, that sexy coolness that Hollywood portrays. There's this sense of freedom. It's interesting how motorcycles are portrayed, especially by Harley Davidson, who's done a really good job marketing this. Somehow riding a motorcycle gives you more freedom. There's a variety of other things that tend to be a draw. I thought I really quite enjoyed the idea of the challenge of developing and mastering a new skill, and really wanted to get into sort of a personal experiment of, can I take this pastime or hobby that is known to be a bit more dangerous, and can I do it safely? Can I mitigate my risks and do the things that I need to do it safely and sort of prove that you can be a safe motorcyclist? At some point for everybody that becomes a motorcyclist anyway, there's that transition from that longing and wanting to ride a bike to actually deciding I'm going to take the plunge, or at least getting very serious and considering that. There's a moment where you have to really pause and think, is this really for me? For me personally, there was a moment, we were going through kind of a transition in my career. I was leaving the military. My kids, although not all moved out of the house at the time, were more grown, more independent, really didn't need me around quite so much. And for whatever reason, my wife, who had generally been a bit of a holdout, had said, you know what, honey, if you want to get a bike, go ahead. And at that moment, I felt like a kid who'd been kind of pushing up against the boundaries all the time. And as soon as that boundary is lifted, it caused you to take a moment and pause and think, is this really something I want? Or was I just sort of saying I wanted to do it to make sure that boundary was still there, or to kind of harass my wife or whatever? And so I really had a moment at that time to think, is this really for me? I think everybody at that point, if they're being mindful about getting into motorcycling, does kind of a personal risk tolerance assessment. Is the risks of motorcycling, is it something that I feel like I can take on reasonably? Obviously, motorcycling does carry inherent risks, many of which you can mitigate, I believe, fully. But there are always things that are outside of your control. Whether you're driving a 2-wheel, 4-wheel, or an 18-wheel vehicle, there are things that just happen, and motorcycles, you're more likely to get injured in a motorcycle than if you had, a cage with crumple zones and airbags protecting you. So you got to be mindful of that and make that assessment. Also, at this stage, you're looking into the general costs. How much are we talking about here? This is a time where, if people are being honest with themselves, they realize the idea of, I'm going to ride a motorcycle to save money on gas, really doesn't hold much water. You end up sinking a lot of money into your motorcycling hobby, and so you might be able to break even because of the gas mileage savings, but for the most part, I think most people find they end up sinking some money into it. So I wouldn't try to get into it just for the purposes of cost savings. Also around this time and in this stage is when you're looking at your local resources. What kind of shops do you have locally? What dealers are there? Do you have a wide variety of selections, or you're pretty limited based on where you live? And then just other factors, motorcycle clubs or other things that might be interesting to you in your local area. How is that going to, affect your decision and the way that you get into motorcycling? For some people, this serious investigation stage is pretty simple and limited just to how soon can I start doing some dank wheelies? Please don't let that be you. Be a little more mindful before you start getting into motorcycling. I think it's a great hobby, but don't let that be you. And so from my own personal experience, I do work in the medical field. And of course, you can understand many of my coworkers have a hard time understanding why I would do something like ride a motorcycle. I do take care of victims of traumatic injuries, including motorcycle injuries. And so I've tried to pay attention as I was thinking about making the decision to start riding a motorcycle to all the circumstances and see, is this really a foolish decision, or is this something I think I could undertake with a reasonable amount of risk? So of course my perspective was biased on the ones that came into the emergency rooms. There were severe enough injuries to come in, but of course non-fatal injuries, so people that would be brought in. And from what I could see, certainly not everybody, but many of the ones that had enough of an injury that might turn you away from motorcycling were chemically altered, either with alcohol or drugs, or might have been showboating, racing, doing other things that were inherently unsafe, whether you're in a motorcycle or a car or whatever. And there were some that were just on group rides where they were perhaps lacking some of the skill or experience, or the group was being a bit more aggressive and they were trying to keep up and unfortunately suffered an injury in that regard, whereas they should have just backed off and done their own thing. And that's really where the phrase comes from, ride your own ride. You got to do what's safe for you within your skill set, your experience level, and not try to keep up with other people. It's where a lot of people can get sucked into having some injuries they could have otherwise avoided. I really do just think it's important to take those risks into consideration. If we don't respect the risks of riding a motorcycle, you're liable to end up with some pretty serious injuries. Even if you do respect the risks, you're always, at risk of having these kind of things happen, an accident or something else, and you need to take your own assessment as to how would that affect you, how would that affect your family before you fully make that plunge. And so then to cover some of my own knowledge gaps, which were a lot when you're getting started, you really need to engage in a lot of internet research, and you want to be careful that you're paying attention to reliable, trustworthy sources. There are plenty of self-proclaimed experts both on the internet and that you'll meet in real life that probably should be avoided. If people are making sensational or controversial sounding claims to get viewership on their channel or giving you advice in the real world that just seems off or weird for some reason, then just avoid them and try to seek out more trustworthy sources. There are plenty of those around. I'll put the link to a few in my description for this video. All right, well, that leads us to step 3, possibly the most fun step of all. The opportunity to research the bikes, all the amazing selections out there and the gear and everything else is really, I found that very exciting. Now, I will say that I didn't spend as much time researching gear as I should have. You tend to spend most of the time wanting to research the bikes. They're just so enticing. You want to find the perfect bike for yourself. You put a lot of stress on that decision, and you spend an awful lot of time looking up the different dealer or manufacturer websites and looking on Craigslist and trying to find all the different things you can about finding that perfect bike just for you. At this point, you have the risk of running into becoming kind of a spec sheet warrior. Now, what does that mean? Well, you don't know as much about riding. You're just trying to get into it, and so you tend to look at a lot of spec sheets from the manufacturers. And that, combined with what the bike looks like to you, or maybe what other reviewers are saying on the internet, is really what you have to go on. You haven't ridden it before. You don't have as much experience to know what type of riding you think you're going to want to do. And so it's just a lot of this, again, internet research, trying to find out everything you can. And you have the risk of kind of getting lost in the dream at this point. After looking at videos and reviews for an hour and a half, 2 hours, that itch for motorcycling has probably been satisfied, and you can go on to other things. And if you're really going to get into motorcycling, at some point, you've got to make a decision and move forward. But this is really a fun stage, I think. You want to take the time to research gear as well as the bike. That's one lesson that I learned a little bit too late and got some gear that wasn't ideal for me. But you want to take time to research both of those. Moving right along, we're now on step 4, training and licensing. Do not skip this step, guys. Many years ago when I was living in California, I was really good friends with one of our local police officers. And when we were talking about this, I was very surprised to learn that many of the motorcyclists that he would pull over when they were doing something illegal actually weren't licensed. And I don't know if that was an appropriate representation of the motorcycling community in that area, or if people that weren't licensed were just more likely to be doing things that were illegal and get pulled over. But it's amazing that there are so many people that do feel like they're perfectly fine riding and not have proper training or even have a license to operate a motorcycle. I found it very helpful, especially as a new rider, getting into a training course. It's just something you can do. It's a minimal commitment. Certainly they cost some money, but it's a minimal commitment to really take that next step to find out, is this really for me or not? I would strongly advocate for the Motorcycle Safety Foundation courses. If you've never ridden before, they've got a 2-day course that will just welcome you and teach you from the very beginning everything you need to know. Very easy, very good group of people, everyone that I've been to. And if you're more experienced, then they've got a 1-day course for people that already pretty much know how to ride and just want to jump past the very basics. Either way, they also talk with you about road strategy and safety tips for how to keep yourself riding long years to come. For those that don't want to do the MSF courses, you can just go through your local DMV and they'll have a testing process as well. One of the nice things about the MSF or similar courses is at the end of the course, they have a test. And if you pass that test, which they're going to do their best to help you to do, then you'll come away with a test waiver and you can just go to your DMV and get your license. That's a really nice feature of that as well. Now, if you're watching this from another country, certainly I can't speak to your training and licensing requirements, but I would definitely encourage you to get the training you need and do it right so you're going to be safe on your motorcycle. Now here we are, final step. You get to buy some stuff. So I put gear first because just like any activity that has a little bit higher risk, you want to make sure you get your safety gear first. If you're going to buy a boat, make sure you've got all your safety gear, your life preservers, whatever you need. Similar with motorcycles. You got to get your gear first. That's how I did it as well. I just felt like it was the safest, smartest thing to do. So when I did finally get that bike, I could hop on and ride away and feel safe. So what do I consider to be basic equipment? A helmet, obviously, that should go without saying. Wear a helmet. Make sure it is ECE certified. That's actually the European standard, but it turns out the American standard is not worth much, honestly. DOT is probably better than nothing. But the ECE, the European standard, has a lot more rigorous testing. They take it a lot more seriously over there. And so I would look for a helmet that is ECE certified. There's a 2205, which is the outgoing certification, which is still better than DOT. But the newest one is the ECE 2206. I understand that has also some more angular acceleration testing along with it just to help reduce concussions and other problems. So definitely get yourself a good helmet that's going to protect the head you're going to put in it, right? You want to make sure you're protected. Boots and gloves would be the next bit of mandatory kit in my opinion. Those are just the things that are going to be specific to motorcycling and help protect you for the most common type of accidents you might have on a motorcycle. Now, you might be surprised I didn't put jacket in there. That was something I got as my basic setup, and I do wear a jacket along with my helmet, boots, and gloves every time I ride. But if you're looking at the most common things to get injured, your helmet, gloves, and boots are going to be your first go-tos. Ryan Fortnine covers that pretty well, and I'll have a link to his video covering that in the description as well. But when your budget permits, you can get the jacket, get the pants, those kind of things. So my riding equipment, ECE certified helmet, gloves, boots, and a mesh jacket with level 2 CE armor in there, shoulders, elbows, and the back protector. The foam that comes with most jackets is useless, but you get a level 2 CE certified back protector as well. Another consideration as you're looking at buying your gear is, of course, where are you riding? Are you going to be having 3-4 seasons? Are you riding in Arizona? Are you riding in Minnesota? Where are you doing this? That's going to definitely affect the type of gear you purchase, and hopefully you've done some research on that to figure out what you want. Always talk with the salesman. Generally, they're going to be very helpful and help you get the type of stuff you need. And generally, if you're shopping locally, your local shop is going to have the type of gear that makes the most sense for that area. And then, of course, paying attention to the riding style. Now, that's one that can be a little bit tricky. A lot of people feel like because they're going to ride a certain type of bike or want to do a certain type of riding style, they have to look a certain way. And I would dissuade you from thinking that way. Focus mostly on gear that's going to be functional and safe and protect you, help you have a good ride, and not so much about trying to be stylish or look a certain way. That's generally going to put you at risk of getting some gear that is perhaps less protective or less functional. Finally, he's going to talk about buying a bike. So the last part of step 5 is buy your bike. That's a great step. So what do I recommend for your first bike for a new rider? There's a lot of recommendations you can find out there. Some of it are great recommendations. There's some pretty awful recommendations out there too. Now, at a baseline, I'd say get a used but a currently functional motorcycle. You don't want to buy a project bike for your first bike because you're just learning, you're trying to get your skills, master your technique, and if you're spending all your time working on it in the garage rather than riding it, that's not very helpful. So get a used but functional bike. There'll be a lot of folks that will recommend certain engine sizes and different things. A common recommendation is to get a 500cc or less engine. I would say that's probably less important than just looking at the bike as a whole. What is this bike meant to do? Is it meant for new riders? I started off on a 650cc bike, which is a little bit big, admittedly, for a beginner. But even though it's a bigger engine than, say, a Yamaha R6, I would definitely not put a Yamaha R6 as a beginner bike, yet my Versa 650 was adequate. It was a little bit difficult because that next point there, which is the seat height. If you're looking for a beginner bike that's going to help you feel comfortable, you usually want to get a lower seat height. If you can put both feet flat on the ground with a lower seat height, you're going to feel so much more comfortable. Can you learn on a bike with a higher seat height? Yes, you can. I did. It can work. It was a little scarier up front, but it can work. You really have to get in the habit of just putting that left foot down at stops and keeping that right foot up on the rear brake, which is pretty much where it belongs anyway, but it just takes away that comfort level of having both feet flat on the ground. And then along with that Yamaha R6 example that I gave, you look at the tune and performance, the overall functionality of the bike. Are you looking at getting a bike that's going to outperform you as a beginner? Well, then don't do it, right? Get a bike that's going to be set up well for you as a beginner so you can really master your techniques and skills, and you'll actually improve your skill faster on a bike you feel comfortable with and can start pushing its limits a little bit more rather than getting on a bike that's going to outperform you. Now, for your dream bike, everybody's got a certain bike in mind they would love to have. Save it for later. Do not get that for your first bike, even if you have the money to do so. If you want that sweet Ducati Superleggera, fine, but not for your first bike, because what's going to happen, you're going to drop that bike at least once and probably several times. Unfortunately, probably in a very embarrassing location, such as stopped at a gas station where everybody's looking at you and wondering, how did you just drop that bike? So get a bike you're not going to feel terrible about dropping and potentially ruining or putting some scratches on it. It's happened to everybody. I actually feel pretty fortunate. I haven't dropped mine very much. But even in my own driveway, I've dropped a bike, and that's pretty common. So get one you're not going to feel too bad about. Well, congratulations. If you made it through all 5 steps, you are now the proud owner of a new motorcycle, a new license, some gear, and you have joined the ranks of motorcyclists. Be ready for a whole bunch of people to question your decision and tell you you've made the wrong choice. I think we were having dinner out with some friends just not long ago, actually. I mentioned I'm in the medical field, and one of our nurse friends made the comment after the motorcycling subject had come up at dinner, something along the lines of, anyone who rides a motorcycle is an absolute moron. And of course, the conversation had come up because I ride, and one of the other gentlemen at the table had been a previous rider. And so it was a bit of awkward circumstance. We had a chance to talk about that with her a little bit. But that's what you're going to face. A lot of your family and friends that are going to just think you've lost your marbles as you decided to ride a motorcycle. You've got to be comfortable with it, with your own decision, and feel like you've made the right choice. My own family has given me quite a bit of grief for it, especially, of course, my loving mother. I remember one time I was riding my first interstate trip. I was riding to visit her from Colorado to Utah, and told her I was on my way, and halfway there I sent her a picture of myself at the Welcome to Utah sign, and she kind of freaked out a little bit. And when I got there, I got some good lectures about how my brother and my nephew had already tried motorcycling, and they learned that it was far too unsafe, and that I should not be doing that myself. So you got to make sure you're comfortable with your decision and know in your heart that you've made the right choice, and be ready to accept the risks and the consequences if something should happen. And you got to, again, maintain respect for the risks of motorcycling. So there you go. What do you think? If you are a prospective rider, was this helpful? Is there other information you feel like you need? Please let me know in the comments. If you're a current rider, what do you think of the steps? How was your pathway? There are a lot of different pathways that people take. None of them are perfect, but I do feel like for those of us that enter motorcycling as adults, these steps represent the thought process and the steps that we go through. For those that had the good fortune of starting as a kid, I'm sure there's a different family dynamic and different pathway that was taken there. So, motorcycling is dangerous. There's no two ways about it. It's going to be more risk than riding in a car. That's just the way it is. But it's also fun. I find it to be quite therapeutic personally. I do enjoy that sense of freedom, feeling more connected to the road, feeling like you're doing something that's more challenging, requires more out of you. And I really enjoy the challenge of continuing to improve my own technique and taking all the training and improving as much as I can. And although you cannot remove all the extra risks of riding a motorcycle, you can mitigate them. And so far, with my own personal experiment, thankfully, I'm finding you can mitigate it enough to make it a reasonably safe pastime. And so in this modern world where we're always being cautious of just about everything that might ever do us harm, I think it is important to take a moment just to remind ourselves that we also need to live. I do like this quote from author Elizabeth Gilbert that says, let us not become so cautious that we forget to live. Bottom line, when it comes to my choice, of course, I obviously chose to ride. And when it comes to the decision as to whether or not you should get a motorcycle and ride, I have to side with Ferris Bueller on this one.
I love driving it. It is so choice. If you have the means, I highly recommend picking one up.